Good Shabbos. Perhaps like me, every year in the weeks leading up to Passover, you pick up one or two of the newest and hottest Haggadot that have been recently published, looking for ways to incorporate new readings, new songs, maybe even parodies or rituals into your Seder. This year, like every other year, many new Haggadot have been written, and I want to share two special Haggadot that have been created. One for the Swifties at your table. The unofficial Taylor Swift Haggadah by Naama ben David was recently published. The only problem is that, like tickets to Taylor Swift's concerts, the Haggadah is actually sold out. It's true. You can check Amazon. The second Haggadah that I actually was able to acquire is a Haggadah called The Promise of Liberty, a Passover Haggadah that incorporates quotes and teachings from our founding fathers, from George Washington and John Adams, who you could bring to your Pesach table, to throughout American history, Harriet Tubman, Sojourner Truth, and so many others who had different roles in the formation, the creation of our American state, and incorporate them into the Haggadah. And I'll close with sharing the words from Senator Joe Lieberman, a blessed memory, who has an essay in this Haggadah. Truthfully, the goal of our Seder is to balance tradition, to balance history, to balance our family rituals, our time-honored classics, and at the same time to make our Seder relevant, to speak to today, for we are obligated to see ourselves as if each and every one of us has been redeemed from Egypt. We must find our Egypt, our affliction, our suffering, our hardship, and our slavery. Sometimes it's hard to find our slavery, and sometimes it's easy, unfortunately. And it's our obligation to tell the story from degradation to praise, to not just sit in the depths of darkness, but to tell the story of redemption, of how there is light at the end of the tunnel. For every year the Haggadah ends with freedom, ends with hope, ends with optimism. L'shana haba'a b'Yerushalayim, next year in Jerusalem. We begin by inviting those who are hungry to join us, and we end by opening our door to welcome Eliyahu Hanavi, Elijah the prophet, to herald better days for all of us. We can ask ourselves this year, is it safe to open up our doors? But why do we sit? And at the end of the Seder, we open our door, which again, a question of our own safety. But when we begin, we say, halachma anya, this is our bread of affliction and bread of poverty. We repeat over and over again, let all who are hungry come and eat. And yet we don't open our doors at the beginning of the Seder. We only open our doors at the end. Our ancestors in Egypt, they marked their doorpost with blood so that the angel of death would pass over their homes, protecting them from the 10th plague. For those who have traveled to Israel in the last 6 months for missions of solidarity, to volunteer, to be witness, they have seen with their own eyes how Israeli homes were marked by blood and by death, by evil and destruction. As we sit down at our Seders this year and ask the famous question, Ma nishtana halayla hazeh, why is this night different? 6 months after October 7th, with 133 hostages still held in captivity in Gaza, as Israel sits in peril from Iranian threats, still at war in Gaza, displaced from the north and the south, as rockets from Hezbollah and Lebanon continue to drop, tensions rising in the West Bank, Gazans' hunger continuing to grow, can we sit at our Pesach tables, surrounded by family and friends, and lead the exact same Seder as we've done years past? Ma nishtana halayla hazeh, what on this night will be different? What on this night must be different to mark this special moment, this difficult moment that we're at as Jewish people? In this festival of freedom and joy, how can we share lessons of hope in times of darkness? The truth is that throughout our time, for thousands of years, the Passover Seder has changed. We don't follow the exact same Seder as the ancient Israelites who just fled Egypt, or the rabbis of the Talmud when they sat down to their Passover Seder. Every generation has innovated and changed the Haggadah to bring the story of Passover to the present, to keep the lessons temporary, for the Seder is the time to ask big questions, questions about morality, history, the world that we want for the future, and what it means to be Jewish. So how can we incorporate post-October 7th and the hostages into our Seder? The truth is that this is a promo. Join me at my weekly class this Monday at noon, and I will share many, many different innovations. It's also on our YouTube channel for all you YouTube watchers. I'm sure you watch the B'nai Yeshurun YouTube channel all the time. But actually, all of our classes, our teaching, our Divrei Torah and sermons are on our YouTube station. So if you can't, join me at noon on Monday with the many, many innovations and variations that have been brought up from different rabbis from across the world in the last few weeks for Passover. I'm going to share one of them with you today. Some have suggested the ritual of leaving an empty chair for a hostage, for a victim of October 7th, for an Israeli soldier serving away from home at our Pesach table, like we have done for other times when we acknowledge, honor, and memorialize those empty spaces at our table, our own table from our own family and our own losses, or those within the larger world or the larger Jewish world. But others say that for the last 6 months, we have been doing that already. We've been setting spaces aside, honoring those empty chairs. And perhaps if you've seen from Israel throughout the world, including in America, all those Shabbat tables that have been set with all those empty chairs. So some suggest that we've been already doing that ritual, and we shouldn't do that. For the Soviet Jewry movement, you may remember, there was a ritual that centered around matzah, our centerpiece of Passover, the quintessential symbol and food of our Pesach story. For the refuseniks, we added an extra matzah to our table, for those that couldn't have in the former Soviet Union. To the traditional 3, we added a 4th matzah called the matzah of hope, for the shared hope to gain the freedom of Soviet Jews. My colleague and friend Rabbi Eli Kampfer of Hadar suggests a different ritual change this year to the matzah on our Passover table. The matzah, which is called lechem oni, translated as the bread of poverty, the bread of affliction, the bread of suffering. It's the food that we ate as slaves, the bare minimum, bread and water. Different than our Shabbat table, which requires 2 loaves of chalot, or bread, on Passover we add a 3rd loaf of matzah. Some say that the 3 matzahs represent the 3 types of Jews, Kohen, Levi, and Yisrael, gathering all of us together as one, united at the Passover table. But in truth, the 3 matzot are a complex symbol representing both abundance and redemption, the luxury that we have as free people with our full tables to set a beautiful table and even to add an extra piece of bread, even if it's maybe not the greatest loaf, but it's matzah. When we break the middle matzah during Yachatz, we reveal our brokenness, but we still have 2 full pieces of matzah left. And of course, as you know, matzah itself is the most fragile of food. If we touch it, we can break it. And perhaps like me, if you spend some enormous amount of money on the special shmora matzah, more money than you ever want to spend on bread, much less matzah, and then you open the box of 10 shmora matzahs, and you're lucky if you get 2 that are unbroken. But my colleague and friend Rabbi Kampfer suggests a different ritual this year. He suggests that in light of everything happening in our world, in light of the fact that how can we sit at a table of abundance when we feel such loss, when we feel such pain, when we feel that something has been removed from us, taken from us, that we have to start our Seder by removing one matzah, that we should only start with 2 matzot on the table, and then break one of them in half, leaving us only 1.5 matzot, which actually follows the tradition of such great rabbis as Maimonides and the Vilna Gaon, who only celebrated Pesach with 2 matzot. Rabbi Kampfer explains it this way, quote, "I'm not recommending a permanent change to the Seder, but this is no normal year. With more than 130 of our people literally in captivity, eating maybe bread and water. The shock of seeing fewer matzahs on our Seder table when we're used to seeing plenty is very appropriate. In fact, it is a version of the shock of the Seder that was originally meant to induce. Unlike any other Shabbat or holiday, our bread, like our hearts, will be in pieces. This is the nature of matzah at the Seder. As Rav Papa in the Talmud teaches, it is a reminder of our people's long suffering in slavery before being redeemed. It is my prayer that next year we can celebrate with a full set of 3 matzot again. But for this year, we mark the suffering of those still in captivity by reducing our plenty and reclaiming the power of the bread of suffering at our Seder. Perhaps you'll follow that ritual like Rabbi Kampfer suggests, of marking October 7th, marking the hostages in captivity by removing 1 matzah from your table, like we will. As I said, I wanted to close with the words from Senator Joe Lieberman of blessed memory. In the Haggadah, The Promise of Liberty, he writes an essay called "Next Year We Will Be Free. We Have a Dream." And he begins this way. Through the millennia, the Jewish people have recited this Haggadah, our national paean to freedom, even while living under conditions closer to slavery than to freedom, and indeed under conditions far worse than slavery. Facing the persecutions of ancient Romans, medieval inquisitors, and the unlikely modern menace of the Third Reich, Jews continue to sing God's praises for their deliverance from slavery to freedom. How can we understand this phenomenon? Although these Jews were no longer slaves to Egyptian pharaohs, in what sense were they actually free? We acknowledge that the present is not perfect, but we recognize that it's not permanent. We know that the future redemption will be at hand and that the era of our final freedom will be realized. At the Seder, we are commanded to remind ourselves that we are the recipients of the miracle of redemption. The freedoms that liberty grants us in our generation create immense collective responsibility. It is up to each of us to be strong enough to sit with whatever our pain, individual and collective, personal and historical, demands. And it is also our sacred responsibility to invite others in, reminding them of our shared purpose and sharing with them the taste of redemptive possibility. As we gather together in just a few days to celebrate Passover, to celebrate freedom, we cannot forget our brothers and sisters in difficulty, in pain, and in affliction. May we find a way to bring to our joyous tables the cracks, the frailty, the fragility, the brokenness, so that we can gather and say together, L'Shana Haba'ah B'Yerushalayim, next year in Jerusalem and in peace. Shabbat Shalom.